going on, people? What's going on? Welcome to We Are Reading. My name is Eli Wananda, and we are reading Yurugu by Marimba Ani. So, yeah, we're on chapter 9 today. Very close to finishing the book by Marimba Ani. We're on page around about 490, I believe. So out of around about 500 and where are we? We've got about 70 pages left of this book. So it's been a real journey. It's been a very eye-opening journey, a very provocative journey. We've learned so much from Mama Marimba Ani on with regard to European thought, European ideology, European culture, and the behavior of Europeans toward us non-Europeans, and understanding why they behave the way they do toward us. So yeah, it's been an excellent book. I've learned so much from it. I've had various paradigm shifts over the last few weeks reading this book, and this very short chapter that I'm gonna give a little synopsis of today is no exception. This chapter discusses the concept of progress, and as we're going to see when we start to go through some of her comments, the idea of progress that we think is some universal human idea of progress isn't actually. It's an idea of progress that is very peculiar, very specific to European people, and as we're going to see, it's quite a crazy idea, basically. And my basic overview of the idea of this chapter is that the European idea of progress is at the heart of much of this destruction that we see in the world today on a social level, psychological level, ecological level, especially, and so on and so forth. So looking forward to getting into it. As I say, it's a short chapter. It's only about 20 pages. So this stream should, in theory, be a shorter chapter, although sometimes you just don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes it's the opposite. The shorter chapters or the shorter texts, you can go into. I feel like I can sometimes go into a lot more detail on specific parts of the chapter because there's not that much else to cover. So I can kind of go on and on and on, and really delve into the things and extrapolate and give examples and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we'll see where we go. Here in the UK, it has been a very sunny day, very lovely day. I've spent most of the day outside with my boys and with Penzi, my wife, and yeah, it's been a beautiful day. I've caught the sun. You can't tell because basically when I'm in the sun, you won't tell the difference really. Like I have to be in the sun for like days and just purely in the sun to get a little bit darker. But I have been in the sun and I have caught the sun, so it's a blessing for sure. So we'll be drinking some cold ginger juice there just to keep me hydrated and all that good stuff. All right, so welcome aboard, Tito District. Peace and blessings to you, sis. Hope you're well. Hope you're having a good one. Just turn this phone down. That's it. And peace and blessings to you, rice and butter as well. Good afternoon. Okay, so it's afternoon over there. Mchana over there. It's afternoon. It's Joni here in the UK. I'm revitalizing my Kiswahili learning journey, which started about 10 years ago. But I took a big detour of several years. But I'm starting again because I realized I have to learn an African language, and Swahili is the one I know a fair amount of already. So maybe there'll be someone in the chat who I can practice some Kiswahili with at some point during the chat. So yeah, karibuni, welcome everybody, karibuni wote, and let's get into it. Progress. What's the deal with this progress thing? Surely everybody wants to progress. Surely this is just like a basic thing, no? Well, this is the thing. This is the thing that Marimba Ani starts the chapter by saying. I'll come back to that comment about rice and butter. You said you're looking to learn with your sons. Oh, Oh, good. Please do learn. Kiswahili is I find it I think it's an easy language to learn. Actually, I think Kiswahili is definitely an easy language to learn because you say it like you see it, and it just there's not that much complication to it. It's just a matter of once you get the grammar right, once you learn how to say first person, second person, plural, singular, third person. Once you work, that's some of those things I keep, especially third person. Talking about third person plurals just confuses me. So saying they, or it's theirs, or you, but talking plural, that stuff, I keep getting it all mixed up in my head. But once you sort out the grammar, you know how to say, you're talking about yourself, talking about someone, an individual other, plural other, plural you, then you're sorted. You're gonna kind of, it's just vocabulary after that, really, learning more and more vocabulary. So yeah, man, let's learn together. I might even try and do a video one day, a stream one day in Kiswahili or about Kiswahili. But yeah, that's the deal. So progress. I was saying that the idea of progress, surely everybody wants to progress. Marimba Ani points out that yes, this is what most people think, and as a result, she actually says that the concept of progress is so embedded in our heads that it's actually very, very hard to even begin to consider that the concept of progress that we think is a natural concept of progress. It's even hard for us to get to think that actually, no, this isn't a universal law of God, or law of nature, or something that's hardwired in the human brain, in the brain of the species. That's very hard to understand because it's so deeply embedded. So on page 490, Marimba Ani says the following. She says, 490, in the setting of European culture, the parochial nature and ideological significance of the idea of progress is difficult to discuss. Like lineality in the Utamawazo, it is more than a conceptual tool in that it becomes part of the meaning of existence for members of the culture. In the classroom, the attempt to present the idea as being culturally bound, i.e. specific to a particular culture. So to even begin to tell someone, yeah, this concept of progress is actually specific to the European people. It's not, to even say that is, back to her, is met with blank stares. What do you mean? Everyone wants to make progress, she quotes. Moreover, because the idea combines European ontological presuppositions and value in such intricate combination and is so deeply embedded in them, finding the right way to present it so that its ethnological implications for European behavior, attitude, and value become evident is not an easy task. So that's the task that she's going, she's saying, look, this is hard. This is a hard thing to do. And trying to do that in a way that will help us to understand how Europeans behave, basically, is a very tricky thing to do. And Marimba Ani, Mama Marimba Ani, even back then, I know now, I've seen a few lectures and interviews of her in the last few years, but 30 years ago, she was very confident. She's like, listen, this is one of the hardest things that you're ever going to try and explain, and I'm going to try and explain it now. So she kind of goes into it and starts to explain it. And the basic point about this whole idea of progress, the unique point, the uniqueness of the European idea of progress is mainly the fact that there is no purpose to the progress. There's no goal. There's no place that is trying to be got to as a result of progress. It's just progress for progress's sake. It's progress for more progress. This, I think, from reading this chapter, this is what I understand to be what she's trying to pull out as being the unique thing about the European idea of progress. It's just for progress. It's progress for progress's sake. It's not trying to get anywhere really in particular. It's just progress. So she breaks this down on page 492, which I will read. I will read in a couple of paragraphs here. She says, I've got it on screen. She says, 492, the idea of progress is a directive of European behavior, a determinant of attitude, a device by which the European judges and imposes those judgments on others. Europeans who, quote unquote, ennoble the, quote unquote, native do so from the pinnacles of a state of progress that they believe it is incumbent upon man, quote unquote, to achieve. It is the European counterpart to what is meant by tradition when it is said that tradition functions normatively in traditional societies. So, and then, sorry, this is where now she explains this thing about progress for progress's sake. The idea is more a methodological commitment than a theory of history. It's interesting. It is a process, an operational mode. Its referent is rationalism, not a euphoric or glorious state of perfection in the future. Only for Marx does it seem to have this connotation. So that's an important point. I'm going to come back to Marx. She drops a few things in this chapter relating to European socialism and Karl Marx and Karl Marx's ideas, which I'll come back to. But a point she makes there, she's clearly got a fair amount of respect for socialism, Marxian socialism, because she's mentioned it a few times as being on the more human end of European thought, of European ideology. So she says it a few times here. She says it she says it as well. She kind of says that, this European progress for progress's sake isn't really going to any particular place. Although Marx, obviously, the idea is that history progresses, and then gets to a point of glorious, fulfillment in the communist age. And then back to Marimba Ani says, in fact, its viability, i.e. the viability of this idea of progress, which is more of a method than a, trying to get anywhere in particular, its viability contradicts the possibility of such a state of perfection, that is. Perfection is not possible in this progress idea. Its mood is much closer to a survival of the fittest aura. It is concerned with the evolving, not with the end product. Progress is always there to be made because its index is wherever you are at a given time. There is always progress to be made, always a proper way to attack a problem rationally, rather than the presumption of a perfect state to be ultimately reached. It rests on the presumption of ceaseless problems, always tension. It presupposes disharmony, disequilibrium, and imbalance. So progress for the sake of progress, it's basic. And this resonates with me. I had to try and cut out a lot of my ranting I was going to do, because I'm like, I see in this, what she's saying here about this idea of progress, I see life. This is just what I see around me. It's just a whole lot of stuff happening, just happening for the sake of happening. A lot of technology. We're going to talk about technology in a minute. A lot of technology being created for what? Just don't know. We don't know what's it being created for. Just for the sake of more, different, growth, for the sake of it. And again, just to reiterate that this progress, so much of this progress has no real purpose besides just being progress. So Marimba Ani asks a question. She says, well, if the Europeans are so rationalistic, or they claim to be so rationalistic and, scientific and all this sort of stuff, and precise and so forth, why are they so committed to, or why is it they have this progress idea, which doesn't actually offer any kind of purpose, doesn't really offer any kind of place to get to? There's no concretely defined future really in this European progress idea. So why are Europeans so interested in that? And she points out that it perfectly fits the ultima rojo of the Europeans, the energy, the energetic drive of Europeans is perfectly suited to this idea of progress. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do I mean? What does Marimba Ani mean? Well, she explains it on page 490. I think write the page number down. But she talks about expansionism and how, it's on that same page. There's 3 paragraphs in a row which just lay this all out. And I'm going to read this one paragraph. it fits the expansionism. So she says she says the answer to that question, why are Europeans into this progress thing? It's ideally fashioned to encourage the growth of the technical order while justifying cultural and political imperialism. Then she says this: we have said that Europeans are expansionistic, and a lot of Yurugu is about that, is about how Europeans are just all about expanding, making themselves bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And to Europeans, the universe represents actual physical space into which they can impose themselves. Their movement in this respect is never from place to place to place. They're no longer nomads. They were nomads once, they're no longer nomads. It is not displacement of themselves from one place to another, but extension. They expand and extend their possessions, never relinquishing territory they have claimed. They never migrate, but always conquer and consume. By this process, they themselves become bigger. The idea of progress allows for this same kind of movement and extension. Conceptually, progressive motion consumes all of the past within it, and progress is not merely different from, it is more than. The idea is, in this way then, essentially expansionistic. So when I was reading this passage, for some reason, when she said there that they never migrate, they always conquer, they always consume, for some reason that really hit me quite hard. Like, as in I was a bit like shocked at first, like, and I thought, I had to think to myself, wait a sec, let me think, where are Europeans in the world and how did they get there? And I mean, I don't know why I was shocked. I should obviously, this should be deeply ingrained in my understanding already. But basically, when you check it out, outside of Europe, and there's probably questions about Europe as well itself, but outside of Europe, you've got North America. We know how they got to North America. They and South America, the Americas, North and South, Turtle Island, or whatever it's called in the North, and then the South. Of course, they went there, the conquistadors, the conquistadors went there, killed off a bunch of people, stole their land, brought our people there to do all the work, to and all that sort of stuff. But basically, yeah, that's what they did. They went there, conquered, killed, brutalized, dominated, and so forth. Then you move over to Africa. Southern Africa is where they are mainly in any kind of significant numbers. And how did they get there? Same thing. These Afrikaners will tell you a story about how, no, we were peacefully migrating. There was nothing there. No one owned the land. So we just went there and we just started cultivating and so forth, it's all that crap. But they went there and conquered. That's what they did. And then they dominate. I mean, we don't need to say, but apartheid, so-called Rhodesia, all that kind of stuff, Namibia as well, the Herero. They went there and killed a bunch of our people and took over. Asia. Are there Europeans in Asia much? Not so much, but certainly in Australasia, i.e. Australia and New Zealand. What happened there? Same thing. They killed them all off. Killed off all of the black original people of Australia and then settled. Any migration, someone might say, well, Marimba Ani said that they never migrate. They do migrate. Look, millions of Europeans have migrated to North America, South America, and Australia. That's true. But they carved out they created the space for themselves there through the butchery and killing and so forth and so on. And then here's the funny thing, or not funny thing, the interesting thing about these people is that they are expansionistic and they must go out and expand themselves everywhere. But by the same token, they are terrified and fearful of everybody. And they're terrified of being overwhelmed. They're terrified of being, bred out. They're terrified of being all that sort of stuff. So what was my point? That's why the immigration happened. So that's why the migration happened. When you look at Brazil and Argentina in particular, Argentina at one point, I believe, maybe 200 years ago, in 1800s, Argentina was maybe majority African. Argentina, potentially majority African population back then. And they were so terrified about that they flooded the country with Italian migrants, Spanish migrants, to whiten the country. Similar to, and this is most explicitly and brutally seen, I suppose, in Brazil, or most. The best lesson to see it is in Brazil, because Brazil, when I was growing up, I thought Brazil, rainbow nation, mixed, everyone's mixed, they all blend together. There's no racism. They marry each other, black, white. Oh, it's just peace and love, man. That was the image that was exported to us when I was younger through particularly the Brazilian football team. And then I come to find out when I get a little bit older that Brazil is not I've been there as well. Brazil is not some pure, raceless, anti-racist heaven. Actually, no. And the reason that is the case is because race has been, or anti-blackness has been rooted in the very genetics of the country. So there's a thing called, I think the pronunciation is embranquecimento, I think it is. But it's a Portuguese term, which means whitening. And there's some great articles out there, great history out there about how these Europeans, when you look at their writings, look at the things they were saying, they were absolutely terrified of the Africans. And the Chinese, interestingly, because there were a lot of Chinese at a certain point in time, and they were terrified. They were like, no, we can't let these Chinese and blacks kind of, we can't be a black country because they're subhuman and all this sort of stuff. And so they actively brought in millions and millions and millions of immigrants mainly from Italy, Portugal, of course, because it was a Portuguese colony, and Germany, even a lot of Germans in Portugal and so forth. So even that migration itself is about expansion and subjugation of the black populations mainly. So that, I don't know why, for some reason, like I said, that did kind of hit me hard when she made that point. But actually, it's like, these people, they talk about the Europeans. They talk about immigration, and they're banging on about immigration. And then the obvious counterpoint to that, argument to that, is say, but have you seen your bloody history, people, Europeans? Have you seen how you got around the world and what you've done? What Europeans have done to various parts of the world. And then now you've got the temerity and audacity to complain about some minuscule numbers of people coming peacefully to your country to work and carve out, to carve out some kind of life for themselves because you have messed up their own country to such an extent, So it's just, anyway, it feeds a little bit into that whole point. However, the point is that expansion that is of course driven by the foundational elements of the culture. So Europeans expand. Why? Because they have to expand. They separate themselves. I say this every week, so apologies if I sound like a broken record, but as we looked at in the first 1 or 2 chapters, looking at Plato and others, the whole idea of the dominant European culture is that the self is the mind, the self is rational, the self is disembodied, the self is separate even from its own body, and certainly separate from the rest of the universe, separate from other people, separate from nature and all that sort of stuff. It's a distinct, separate thing. Only the mind, only the self can really know anything through pure rational abstraction. All these other emotion and culture and all this sort of stuff is lower, is nothing, and they separate themselves from the universe, and they must dominate the universe because the mind is better than the universe, so it must dominate the universe. And that domination, basically, that striving for domination, basically has propelled them throughout their history, and propels them to this day to just keep dominating more and more and more and more and more of existence, basically. So this expansionism, because they have this expansionism at the heart of their culture, the idea of progress perfectly suits that, because it's as a mindset, as a mode of operation, modus operandi, embedded deep within us, within people. It motivates people to just keep going for no particular purpose except to just keep going, to keep creating. Now, capitalism, my notes here might be a little bit mixed up, but you have to bring in capitalism at this point, because at peace, everything is politics. Good to have you on board, family. Hope you're well. yeah, you have to talk about capitalism, because capitalism is like, it is the pinnacle, the highest stage of the European Asili. You know, it's the highest, the latest development of the Asili, and it's, when you look at capitalism, capitalism is all about profit. Basically, that's the thing that makes capitalism unique, is that it's the means of production are owned privately rather than communally, and production itself, you know, making stuff, building things, whatever, organizing our resources, is done for the purpose of generating profits. Now, the capitalists will turn around and say, no, that's not the main reason. The main reason is that we want to meet people's needs and this, that, and the other. And it's like, oh, really? So why is it that, to quickly answer that, you just have to turn around and say, is that why there's so much homelessness in capitalist countries then? If capitalism's all about meeting people's needs, why is there so much homelessness? If capitalism is about meeting people's needs, why are there so many people, even in a country like the UK, and particularly recently, who can't? There was a news story, for example, the other day about how increasing numbers of parents, mothers mainly, are stealing baby formula. And obviously, I mean, that's a whole story in itself, like why so many of us rely on formula milk. But the important point is that mothers are stealing formula milk. Why are mothers? Why, if capitalism is all about people meeting their needs, why are there so many people who can't afford baby milk for their own babies? What, you know what I mean? Why, if capitalism is about meeting people's needs, why did it need slavery to create it? Why did it need colonialism to create it? Why does it keep needing ever more expansive wars of destruction and so forth? What's that got to do with people's needs? It's not to do with meeting actual people's needs, human needs. It's nothing to do with those things, actually. It's only peripherally to do with those things. You know, capitalism might help to provide needs, but that's not the main purpose of it. That's like a byproduct of the main purpose, which is for profit, to make profit for the capitalists. And that in and of itself is perfect for this Ultima Rojo, because you can never have too much profit, can you? You can never have too much profit. There's always going to be more profit to make. This is one of the things that I sometimes wonder to myself, like, how much profit do you need? Is there not a point in time where you sit down and just say, cool, all right, I'm super rich, fine, just sit down, let me just go off and, but the system of capitalism basically pits capitalists against each other, pits these businesses and their political friends against each other in this race of profit, in this profit race, profit, race for profits. That's the purpose, to just keep profiteering. There can never be an end with that in mind. It's just ongoing. And it's about devouring, you know, more and more and more. And what I've written down here is now, I've written down, you know, capitalists must consume more and more, even spheres of existence. Actually, it's to a point where you'd think, okay, cool, come on, surely now, most people, say in the UK, most people have somewhere to live. Most people have, you know, basically enough to eat. Most people, do you know what I mean? So like, there's probably not, you'd think, oh, there's not much else to do. Like, surely there's not much else to do. But actually, no, because what you can start doing is, because what capitalism does is it brings more and more spheres of human existence into the logic of the market, or the logic of capitalism. So once upon a time, you know, once upon a time, most land in the UK, as in most other parts of the world, was common land. Most land was common land, and it was commonly owned, if you like, commonly owned by the community. Everyone had access to it. It was actually enshrined in law that everyone had access to this land and could forage and all that sort of stuff, graze their animals, graze their farms, you know, so on and so forth. But of course, the rising capitalist order saw that, no, this won't do. How can we make profits from that? So they ripped the British people, ripped them off the land over many hundreds of years through things called enclosure acts, and they forced them into the cities where they were now dependent on the capitalists to generate a salary so that they could provide for themselves in the way that they used to provide for themselves through their own means in their communities from the land. Now, in order to provide for themselves, they have to work for the capitalists. And that's an example. The commons, you hear this, there's a very important concept called the commons that we should understand, that has to get, it gets dragged into the market so that they can profit off it, or off of it, as you Americans say, off of it. They can profit off of it. More and more areas of life come under the control of the market and the technical order, which we're going to talk about in a second. And the more areas do get dominated by the market, sucked into the market, the more areas, it's like, oh, we need more. No, more. The more even, plants and seeds is the obvious one. That's something, once upon a time. Well, anyway, now even plants, even species of plants and crops are being commodified, and intellectual property, Monsanto and all these other companies can claim, what was it? There's some ludicrous examples of this, but I believe there are some examples where they say, oh, there's this particular variant of rice in India. Right, that's ours now. We own the intellectual property of that, meaning that no one can grow. What they're trying to get it to a point of is that no one can grow these seeds without coming through us, and they have to buy it from us. They're even genetically modifying them so that so that you have to keep buying the seeds from them. The plants, the fruits or vegetables themselves won't have seeds in them, so you can't grow them yourselves. It's constantly trying to commodify everything. The oceans, space, radio frequencies, even personal data. So even personal data is a thriving industry. We all have data, information about ourselves. That's personal data, and now that's being traded. What was Cambridge Analytica? That whole Cambridge Analytica thing in 2016, I think it was, where this company was basically working on Facebook or with Facebook to use our data to basically program us to feed us with certain political ideas in order to help. Was it Brexit or the Tory Conservative Party? Anyway, one of the two. But personal data is now big business. Nanotechnology. I remember reading or watching a video from some transhumanists or post-humanists who were talking about how nanotechnology is going to open up the human body for commodification and for monitoring and ordering, and then I'll come back. I've written here also human attention, but I'm going to move that. I'm going to move that till later, because I want to, toward the end of the video, I'm going to talk about some of the psychological impacts of this progress. But the main point is that, this progress thing is perfectly suited to capitalism, and it's all of these things are basically manifestations or helping reinforcing the ultima rojo of the Europeans. Then a couple of comments here. Make sure you like the video, by the way. Let me just put that banner there. Like the video for the algorithm, please. Thank you, guys. So Desaline said, peace and blessings to you, by the way, Desaline. And you said their mentality reflects the environment in which they evolved into modern Europeans, scarcity and starvation for thousands of years. Yeah, and we've talked about that. We talked about that in a bit of detail last week, actually, because last week we covered how Barbara Richard King talked about, Barbara Richard King, Mama Frances Cress Welsing, Baba Sheikh Anta Diop, all basically talk about this environmental point here, which is very important as well. Because sometimes I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, another really good thing about this book, Yurugu, is that she doesn't just talk about, Plato, Plato did this, and Francis Bacon, I did that, and then René Descartes did this, and that's why Europeans are the way they are. No, she does spend a lot of time talking about where does this come from? Where does this ultima rojo come from? And exactly that, yeah. the glacial period in Europe. They were cut off from the sun, cut off from you know, the scarcity, exactly, scarcity and starvation and all that sort of stuff, and also melanin depletion, which is what we mainly talked about last week. And yeah, that's where this expansionist ultima rojo, energetic drive, exactly comes from. And then Tito District, it said, it's never enough. Capitalists are insatiable when it comes to seeking profits. Yeah. And it's kind of impressive in a demonic kind of way how ruthless it all is, how they've managed to get us into this situation where everything is happening just for the sake of profit. And then everything is politics. You said we're living in a simulation. It's absolutely crazy. Tell me more about that. Actually, I like that. I like that idea. But it is like that. And I'm going to talk about what I see as some of the psychological impacts of that a little bit later. But so yeah, so that's the thing. Expansionism is the expansionist ultima rojo is what led the Europeans to gravitate toward this idea of progress for progress sake, progress. And then this progress for progress sake is a perfect tool for the development of capitalism, but also the technical order and the subjugation of others through imperialism and all that sort of stuff, as we're going to talk about in a little bit. So having burned fire on capitalism, yeah, warmongering. Oh, Paul Morris, peace. Glad you found your way here. Warmongering is at the heart of capitalism. Yeah, it is. It is. It is, and you see it now all the time. They're just constantly, and I'm going to talk about socialism in a minute, by the way, but constantly finding some reason to have a war somewhere with someone. This whole Russia thing now, for example, is a great example. Like, you know, they're desperate, absolutely desperate to fight this war with them. And they're trying to find a way to fight this war with Russia. It just so happens that in this multipolar world where China is a thing, again, as it has been for most of history, but you know, they've been humiliated for like couple hundred years or so, but they're back now and they're not taking prison. They're not messing about. They're like, you know, they know you probably couldn't really like just fight Russia and then expect China to just sit around and, but anyway, that's, yeah, warmongering is absolutely at the heart of capitalism. And then Paul Morris, you also said, look at the vocabulary they use for business: takeovers, buyout, dominating the market. Yeah, exactly. It's like a dog eat dog world. You know, everything is basically, you better do it, because if you don't do it, someone else will. That's basically what it is. If you don't do it, somebody else will. And acquisitions and mergers and all this sort of stuff. It's like this. It really does. Like, that's probably a really good study to do, would be to study the language of business, study the language of the markets, as you know, as exemplified in capitalism, to see how it really does reflect the mindset of Europe and Europeans. But one thing I do want to say though is that socialism too. Let's not get too. Let's not. I'm not trying to say that this is just a capitalist thing, actually, because it's bigger than that. Talking about the European as silly. If there's one thing that comes loud and clear through this book of Marimba Ani, is that even the opponents of the capitalists, or even the left, right, you know, whatever, they all share the same kind of principles. And so one of the ways, so on page 502, sorry, let's just have a look. Where did I say page 502? Yeah. Okay, this is good. This is interesting. She says that socialism. Oh no, let me read the rest of it. I like this. This is good. Let's read the whole of this little section here. She says, thanks, everything's politics. I'll come back to that simulation thing in a sec. But she writes on page 502, European progress has been made at the expense of quality of human existence? Where is the progress toward greater spirituality, toward human understanding, toward tolerance, toward an appreciation of diversity and plurality, away from aggression? Obviously, European reason has not performed well in these areas because the template of the European Asili does not include a model for the development of humanity, only of its negation. And that point there, just really understand that point. When she talks about, when she says that the European idea of progress, you know, is about the negation of humanity, she really does mean that, because what she's saying is it's going back to that whole thing of Plato and the idea that, you know, emotion and the body and feelings and culture, even all these kinds of things, are lesser than abstraction and, you know, the abstraction, the truth, which can only be got through abstraction by the mind, and, you know, everything else is basically lesser than, and so is kind of trampled upon and diminished. And so Europeans themselves are cut off from the sources of true of emotional well-being and so forth, because European culture is basically anti-human. And so, of course, European culture and the idea of progress, of course, the idea of progress can't bring about human development, because it's actually anti-human in its nature. We talked about that in previous videos. And then she says, so the template of the European Asili, i.e. cultural ideological core, seed. Asili is seed in Kiswahili, by the way. So yeah, does not include a model for the development of humanity, only of its negation, of technological efficiency, and of greater capital gain, the tools of power. Human-oriented mechanisms conflict with the driving power force. Socialism, and this is where I was getting to, socialism is the closest thing to a humanistic paradigm within the European tradition, has taken the shape of another mechanistic order in the ideology of Eastern Europeans. Remember, she's writing this in the mid-1990s. Developments in Eastern Europe, beginning with the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1990, attest to the spiritual inadequacy of European socialism. It is yet another materialistic conception, and therefore cannot compete with, in fact, must ultimately succumb to the superior materialism of capitalist ideology. And all that that's just a neat little way for me to basically point out that yes, Europe, socialism as practiced by the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc and all that sort of stuff for most of the 20th century was all about the same principle of progress. And you can see that with regard to so-called economic growth. One of the things I vaguely remember even, you know, hearing about the Soviet Union, you know, oh yeah, the growth in the Soviet Union, we've had 10% growth for 50 years or whatever. You hear about China now as well. China, you know, the proof of the validity of the Chinese political and economic system is said to be found in the fact that China is growing so fast, economically, you know, growing so fast. It's this growth thing, you know, and I was talking about Tito District. We were on one of my posts recently, we were having a little conversation about degrowth, which speaks a little bit to this growth obsession, this imperative of economic growth drives both capitalism and so-called socialism. It's just that they differ in the methods, the means by which they want to bring about this growth. But it's assumed that growth is, you know, is the be all and is the purpose of economics. Growth. You even see as well, you know, you see it with Africa right now. You know, oh, Ghana, fastest growing economy in Africa is Ghana. African economies are the fastest growing economies on earth. As if that tells us anything about anything, really. What does that tell us? Maybe people don't understand or recognize that economic growth is all about this thing called gross domestic product, which is the standard definition is like GDP is the sum total of everything that's being produced and all the goods and services the value of all the goods and services combined, that's the gross domestic product of a particular region or country. And they break it down by person. So they divide that number, that billions or whatever pounds per person. And they say, oh, GDP per capita. Notice how people are capita per capita. But anyway, this growth thing, this whole thing about growth is intrinsically part of this European concept of progress. Because growth for what? To grow where? What for? It's just perfectly in line with the whole thing of expansionism. Expand the economy. What for? Just to expand it. But for what? Is it getting, it's not even a means to an end. It's almost like an end to an end. It is the end purpose. So anyway, and then she points out on page 508 that Karl Marx himself, he said that colonialism helped Africa because it moved Africa along, Africans, it moved us along this line of, what's the best way to do it? That way, isn't it? This line of progress, that from communalism, it moved us into capitalism, from feudalism to capitalism. It's very messy and violent. But at the end of the day, thankfully, you hear socialists say this. They say that capitalism is a progressive force because that word progressive, it's moving us along to somewhere. Where to? I mean, to be fair, the socialists say, yes, moving us along to this utopian place in the future. But the fact of the matter is, that's, it's really just a slightly different version of the same thing. And I wrote down here, maybe controversial, but I do see a lot of this kind of progress and forward ever, backward never. Kwame Nkrumah, I believe, came up with that saying, and it's very popular amongst our brothers and sisters in the world of Pan-Africanism. Forward ever, backward never, and it's this, we must move forward, we must move forward. And obviously in Pan-Africanism and the liberation struggles, the forward motion was mainly about liberating ourselves from the colonialists and the neo-colonialists. So that, not to say that, but I do think we need to be a little bit mindful of, perhaps we might kind of buy into some of these principles of progress in some of our liberatory, in our liberation strategies and concepts. Maybe we just need to be careful about some of these concepts, because we might end up, reiterating or repeating what we've seen in the so-called socialist world elsewhere. But basic point of that section, my section here, is that socialism and capitalism are birds of a feather in this regard. The progress train, they're both on the progress train. They just differ as to how we're going to, exactly how to best progress and progress faster. But they want to progress more the same. So let's look at some of these comments here. So the simulation thing, yeah, thanks, Everything is Politics. You said that simulation, in that everything is a construct. Things don't have to be this way. Scarcity is man-made. Yeah, we have everything we need to thrive, yet we perpetually choose to live under these conditions, or we're forced to live under these conditions. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, one of the things, land, homelessness is very dear to my heart, because I think it's a very basic, food, clothes, and shelter. I mean, probably food and shelter, such basic human needs. And yet, because of the way that our societies are structured by capitalism predominantly, people don't want to, the cost of living, rents and mortgages and stuff like that, skyrockets all the time. Not because it's the same land, it's the same location, but because housing has been commodified, and there's a whole lot of bank money and government money flooding in there to basically enable landowners, homeowners to suck up the benefits. It's very, very expensive to find somewhere to live. I was telling my children the other day, I tell them quite a few times that, in Africa back in the day, I must remember to kind of make sure they know that it's not quite like this so much now, but certainly back in the day, you had somewhere to live by virtue of you being a person. By you being a person, you have somewhere to live because you are a member of the community, and everyone has somewhere to live in the community. Everyone is somebody. Everyone's value is in the fact that they are who they are, what they are who they are. They don't need to pay. They don't need to buy anywhere. They don't need to do anything like that. You have somewhere to live. Compare that with what we have in the modern so-called world. So, yeah, but we're persuaded, or we're told to think that it's all natural. And this, I think, the last chapter, universalism, might go into this in a lot more detail. But we're continuously persuaded that this is all there is. And our imaginations are shackled because we genuinely think this is all there is. Desalines said, Desalines, you said, that does sound like something Kwame Nkrumah would say, but I thought it was Marcus Garvey, but don't quote me on that though. Yeah, funnily enough, I first heard that forward ever, backward never from reggae songs. Steel Pulse, it might have been, who I talk about all the blooming time. But I think that term is very, very popular in Jamaica. So it might have come from Marcus Garvey, to be honest. And to be fair, and we're talking about it as if Garvey and Nkrumah are two, just random, unconnected individuals. Kwame Nkrumah, or Sajifo Kwame Nkrumah, Baba Kwame Nkrumah, said that Baba Marcus Garvey, when Kwame Nkrumah was in the USA studying, because he was there for years studying, he said that the person or the book that had the biggest influence on him, on his thinking, on his politics and so forth, was, I think it was The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. But certainly Marcus Garvey was a huge influence on him. Hence, the flag of Ghana, amongst many other things, has the black star in the middle. Why does the flag of Ghana have a black star in the middle? Is it a random thing? No, the black star liner of Marcus Garvey. He was, so I love that Pan-African global, global black connection there. So if it wasn't Nkrumah who popularized the term, maybe he got it from Garvey directly, or maybe, definitely the concept maybe came from, Garvey, even if he didn't say the actual terms. So yeah, and then responding to that, everything's politics, responding to Desalines, said, absolutely, and the rest of the world has been forced at gunpoint to live under this simulation. Oh yeah, talking about this simulation thing. Oh, I missed a bunch of comments here. Yes, sorry, yeah, Desalines, you said that their orientation toward themselves, others, and the world's resources was established in an ice age environment characterized by scarcity. Yeah, we talked about that. Then Tito District says, right, if the citizens' quality of life isn't improving, then what real value is growth of an economy, yeah. And then I was surprised how much Marx praised capitalism when I started reading his work. Definitely, yeah. You see it a little bit in more traditional socialists as well. There's a lot of praise for capitalism. Actually, it's almost like they're like, yes, we wanted to get to where capitalism has got us to, but just with more equity, basically. So there's a lot of the sharing of the, and there was something that Marx wrote with regard to India. Did he write a whole book about India or something? And you really see his chauvinism with regard to Indians and others, and very, 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 very gushing praise for capitalism as being a progressive force and all that sort of stuff, and very denigrating of the so-called inferiority of Indians and others and so forth. So that's the thing, is what I was sort of saying, is that, and I think I've talked about Tanzania before as well, but we saw a little bit of an example of that with the villagization thing, where Julius Nyerere, Baba Julius Nyerere, tried to bring about this forced reorganization of the countryside, basically, because they wanted to make it more rational agriculture, more rational and so forth. This technical order is in the heads of a lot of socialists, so-called state socialists. And we must be careful that we don't end up just having these same ideas in our heads. And it is, it's hard sometimes doing all this critiquing and criticizing, because the obvious question would be, well, what's your solution? What's your alternative to all of this sort of stuff? And it's hard because I don't have a particular alternative now, really. I don't have some big grand vision. I think that we're probably going to have to get a little bit transcendental in order to, really start to conceptualize how we might differently organize our societies. Transcendental, by which I mean the Sankofa, looking back at what we were doing, learn from our wisdom of our ancestors and so forth, and then moving forward as well, looking ahead and, you know, getting ourselves out of these assumptions of all these other people to think about how we could best build ourselves and, you know, move forward. That's Sankofa. That's my understanding of Afrofuturism as well, African futurism. It's not just let's just look forward. It's a look back as well, learn from what's gone before, and that's probably going to take different forms of learning and studying and all that sort of stuff, rather than just the same logical, rationalistic kind of ways of thinking. Sorry, I'm rubbing my eyes so much there. Hay fever's kicking in a little bit. Then everything's politics. You said, I think it would be good to have a separate convo about the various iterations that socialism and communism can take. Yeah, while coexisting in a world with capital. Economic anarchism is an example of this. Well, I absolutely agree with that 100%. I'm fully, like, this is why I try to be careful to not just say socialism in the sense of socialism is completely defined just by what happened in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. No, absolutely not. I keep saying I'm basically an anarchist at heart. And that definitely will be something we'll touch on in future. And then let's just quickly bash through here. I think we can probably move on. Yeah, and then just this last point here. So Sankofa, Tito District, you said Sankofa 100%. We had myriad working models that we can study and learn from how to implement, and much more sustainable than what's in place now. Yeah, and then something that, when I had that conversation with Kamjiverse the other day, something that he says quite a lot, which is quite important, is he points out, because of the linguistic barriers that we have between us Anglophones and, you know, Francophones and Lusophones, that's Portuguese, isn't it? What's Spanish? Hispanophones, whatever, you know, because of the different language, the different colonial languages that were foisted upon us, we're very cut off. So even how are we going to learn about these different, you know, models, working models is a challenge, because I can't speak French, I can't read French really, so I'm not going to be able to read about what was going on in large chunks of West Africa, same with Portuguese and so forth. So you know, it might sound kooky, but I do think that the transcendentalism is going to have to be a thing at some point. We're going to have to start to think about different ways of learning about these things, but I don't know exactly how that's going to work. So don't quote me on that, people. Cool. All right. So a couple more things I want to say about this chapter so we're going to talk about technology now. This is very important. What Marimba Ani says, and I'll come back to any more comments in a minute. Thank you for this discussion, guys. By the way, loving it. Oh, actually no. Let me just touch on that comment. Desalines, you said it's interesting that Europeans are acting something toward nature in a manner that will create the scarcity they will. Oh man, that's so true, isn't it? That's true. And actually, Marimba Ani says something at some point. She says something on the lines of, you know, these Europeans are so arrogant that they are going to destroy their own future. That's how they're so obsessed with progress and all this sort of stuff, so committed to it, that they're actually going to destroy their own future as a result. And this is a great point, that we're getting to a point where the scarcity that their whole Asili was forged in and created in order to escape is where they're sending us down the road of. And actually we are there now. We're in that scarcity now. Artificial scarcity. Like I can't remember who it was saying, like, there's more than enough actually for everybody, but because of the profit motive and whatnot, and you know, the ideology of Europeans, it gets skewed. So 1% own everything, and the rest of us have to. You know what I mean? That's what it is. So we already have that scarcity actually. And then last point here, Tito District. Yeah, you said you got. She said I got a book from Mbog Basong about traditional African economic models, but it's in French. I never learned enough to be fluent, so we need translators. Yeah, and that doesn't. One of the things, as much as I'm saying I want to learn Kiswahili, I do wish that I'd have paid a lot more attention when we did French when I was in school. I wish I'd have paid more. I wish I'd have just made sure that I left school with working French, because, oh my goodness me, there's like even Cheikh Anta Diop's got, a lot of his writings in French. Theophile Benga, a lot of his writings are in French. There's whole websites. Benga's got a whole website that's just in French. And I'm like, it's just like, oh man, any language actually. If you know another European language, don't lose that European language, because unfortunately it is an important key to unlock, access some of our own knowledge, unfortunately, which is trapped in these European linguistics. So, all right, let me move on. Technology. Marimba Ani says that technological efficiency is what gives what basically proves the validity of this progress concept. Remember, progress in this ethnologically specific concept of progress, which we think is a universal concept of progress. It's a European concept of progress. It's about progress for progress sake. Just keep progressing. Where to, no one knows. Just progress. Because it doesn't have a concrete end goal, it doesn't really have any specific places that we're supposed to be progressing toward, it needs something to justify it. And Marimba Ani argues persuasively, in my opinion, that technology and technological success is what justifies this thing, or what gives it kind of validity. So I'm going to read, where are we? Page 496, I think. Inevitability of progress. Yeah, 496. She says this. She says, is that right? The idea? Yeah. All right, there's two places I'm going to read. Sorry, 495, first of all. Sorry, 496. Yeah, top of 496, and then we're going to go to for the second part of 496. All right, she says this. She says the idea of progress had, 496, then 495. I'm going to do it in a slightly different order to what she did it, because I think this makes more sense. She says, first of all, she talks about why the idea of progress has been so popular and so powerful amongst Europeans. She says, the idea of progress had an irresistible attraction for Europeans. It was, after all, and this is stuff we've talked about already, it was, after all, created out of their own sentiment, their ultima rojo, energetic drive. It corresponded to their ultima wazo, culturally structured thought, and comprised part of the conquering mood. But it was technological efficiency that clinched it, that provided tangible evidence of material gain and accomplishment. Technological success gave Europeans the illusion of an objectively, i.e. universally, valid criterion by which to judge their progress. If power over others is the ultimate and ever-present goal, as it is for the Asili, and clearly technological superiority brings this kind of power, then the progress ideology that assumes lineality must certainly be right. The African cyclical view of sacred time is characterized by, anyway, I'll forget that bit. But yeah, the point there is, that's the point there, isn't it? That the impressive technological efficiency and advanced technology of the Europeans, specific type of technology of the Europeans, is the thing that basically justifies their this whole thing, justifies everything about them, really. But certainly this whole concept of progress, because dominating everybody else and everything else is the purpose of the Asili, is the main drive of the ultima rojo, energetic drive. And so technology is what does that. And no one can argue with the West that on the point that Europe is technologically the most advanced, if you want to use that term. Nobody else, no other people have created such a wide, bewildering array of technology in all of our lives, on a social level, on a military level, on an economic level. Technology is constantly moving forward with these Europeans. And it made me think of talking about Karl Marx. There's a section at the right at the start of the Communist Manifesto where, written in like 1850 or whatever it is, and Marx and Engels are saying everything is changing, everything is in flux, nothing is the same, the ground is shifting because of the productive forces of capitalism. And he's like very, Marx and Engels are very, very, like we said earlier, very praising of the productive energy of capitalism. Capitalism being the latest iteration of the European Asili, in that, yes, it does. They have absolutely rinsed it when it comes to technology. Hats off to them. There's technology all over the place. Obviously, what's this technology doing is another point. But the fact of the matter is that technology has enabled them is what has enabled them. Figure that the Gatling guns, the machine guns. Do you know what I mean? We had our spears. We had our shields and spears, but their guns were greater, and we had to prepare for the slaughter. Steel pulse, soldiers. That song, Soldiers, that I keep talking about again. They're telling they just mow us down. You see those, you can imagine the wars that were fought when the Amazulu and others were trying to fight off the British in the south, up south of Africa, and the British would just perch machine guns on a hill and mow a bunch of them down. Obviously, still had to fight for a long time, but that's one of the things that Baba Walter Rodney points out in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. He points out that the two main pivotal advances that superiority that Europeans had over Africans was nautical travel, I think it was, he said. So ship traveling around, they were more advanced in that regards, but also two, they had guns. They just had guns, better guns than we had. We had some guns, but they were just, because their whole Ultra Morocco was all about, their whole Asili is all about violence and aggression. They pour an inordinate amount of time into weaponry and so forth. So everything is politics. You said something on that point, which is that they have a death urge, yet they're constantly trying to avoid death in the same manner that they treat black folks, want us dead and alive at the same time. Very strange. But anyway, what that speaks a little bit to, that comment speaks a little bit to, is this macabre fascination with destruction of everything all the time. So then Marimba Ani says on page 496 that, and this is then going to go, I think, into my talking a little bit about the psychological the impact that all of this sort of stuff has on well-being. She said on page 495, she said that the idea of progress is a philosophy of change, and as such tends to support any innovation, anything new. Wherever this force leads, is it up here actually? Oh yes, up here. Wherever this force leads is by definition good. Whereas in the context of other worldviews, what could be defined as progressive activity depends on a concretized goal. So it's not that other people don't have a concept of progress. It's just that in other cultures, progress is getting to some specific thing. But the idea of progress transforms what is merely change into directed movement. Participants in European culture perceive change in this way, continually, and here we go. This is the thing now I wanted to focus on. Continually influenced by the images of technology, they are provided with directive signposts and the standard that gives order to otherwise directionless motion. Technology provides the model of efficiency, a model that more perfectly than any imaginable concurs with the philosophy of change. For in the European view, there is no end to efficiency either. No matter how effectively a machine may perform, its function can always be made more effective, thereby creating a new and better machine. Progress is in this way proven, quote unquote, and Europeans can be said to advance as technology advances. It doesn't matter that there is nothing towards which they advance. Their innovations all seem to contribute to greater order in their society, or at least a certain kind of order. The rationalization of their culture in the Weberian sense, Max Weber, Weberian sense, gives them the impression that they have organized their lives more efficiently. This kind of organization is proof of progress, just as their machines are. Taken together, this means that they are smart and getting smarter, the best and getting better. To the European self, progress is obviously more. To the European self, sorry, progress is obviously more than an idea. And so the reason I wanted to read that bit out is that it does speak to. There was another quote she gave where she, from one of these. I want to read this other quote about it. So the point there is that technology is the development and the more and more efficient technology is said to be the purpose really of it all, and that's like you said in the other quote, that's what basically justifies this whole progress thing. But there was a quote somewhere in here which I can't find now, which is really annoying. I'm sorry about this, but there's a quote she gives from someone who basically says that we've got all of this technology, so much technology, and especially lately, last maybe 50 years or so, there's so much technology all around us all the time, more and more and more technology, and it's having very little, if any, positive impact on people's lives. We're getting more and more iPhones. For what? The iPhone 9 or whatever, it's basically the same as the iPhone. What's it doing? It's getting slightly different things. It's making more profits for the capitalists, sure, but it's not really adding anything of value to our lives. If anything, and actually it definitely is, making our lives more and more, it's degenerating our quality of life. So one of the things is our attention. One of the things that modern life is all about is wake up in the morning, on the phone. Let me slide open the phone. Oh, I'm being pinged about. So also got pinged. Okay, someone's pinging me here. Oh, there's something on TV. Oh, my laptop. Let me check my laptop. Oh, I'm gonna go in the car and put the Bluetooth on. Oh, I'm gonna, what I mean? I'm gonna, I don't know, get my electric toothbrush and brush my teeth with the electric toothbrush. Technology. It's like we had toothbrushes. We had phones. Phones are a good thing. Nothing wrong with phones. But why do we need to have millions and millions of iterations of new phones all the time? My point to that is that where is it? There's this constant tension and unease is what we have in in this culture, and the technology, more and more technology, less and less quality relationships with one another, more and more ways of communicating, less and less communicating actually happening. More and more stuff, less and less peace of mind, and sorry, this is a little bit kind of vague, but I see this all around me. So like, hey, Black Soul, peace to you, my family. It's been a long time since I've seen you on one of these streams. Shout out to you, my brother. Kaka wangu, karibu sana. What was I saying? More and more stuff, less and less happen. Sorry, that's what I'm saying. So I see it around me in my friends, my family, friends of friends, friends of family and stuff. We are suffering so hard. Here, I'm talking about here in the UK. I'm not even talking about in some quote unquote poor country. I'm talking about here in the UK. We are struggling hard. People are physically, we're being racked with all kinds of diseases, one of the things, female women, things like fibroids and polycystic ovary syndrome and endometriosis and all these kinds of breast cancers and whatnot, proliferating by the bucket load. And then you've got the mental stuff, the psychological stuff is probably the thing that really hits me. And this is something in the work world. Honestly, every day when I'm at work, I'm just like, I know this is pointless. I'm not working in an industry that is making anything. We're not making anything that anyone really needs. It's just the service sector that I work in. We're not doing it. We're not really doing anything of any note for a start. But then it's all the, all the bureaucracy and power struggles and beefs, and we're draining so much energy into this crap. And then, like, who was it? Everything was politics, I think you said. Not to mention the environmental degradation, the pollution, and all this sort of stuff. And yet, we just have to keep progressing. We have to keep having more and more and more and more. People who don't have technology are denigrated, and seen as being so backward and so on and so forth. And I think that's another area. I'm being a bit vague. My point, the rough point I'm trying to make is that let's also not fall into this technological validation thing, whether we think that, the society that's the most technologically advanced is better. It's just not, particularly if we're thinking of technology as being only this sort of stuff, because she makes a point that actually a people's culture and spirit you could look at as being a technology as well. But obviously Europeans don't want to hear about all that crap. They want to know, where's your stuff? Where's your actual technology? Have you, for example, created a magnet? This is a magnet that we use to keep the cupboards in this kitchen locked, and then this magnet can kind of open them, and it means the children can't open. It's useful, but really, there's a lot of this sort of stuff. A magnet that will stop cupboards from being opened. Imagine that is made of plastic. Imagine how much waste has been made as a result of that. You don't need that crap, really. The children could just not go into the cupboards, or we could just not have toxic things in our cupboards in the first place. So yeah, the rough point on that, was that technology. We just need to be careful not to share in these assumptions of Europeans with regard to technology, basically justifying everything. Right. So the last thing I want to say, there's various different things I want to say, but the last thing I wanted to say is that Marimba Ani, again, in this chapter, as she's done in many chapters, she makes it clear that both progressives and conservatives, or the right and left, they're all committed to this idea of progress. And she gives she explains that they all agree on progress and technological efficiency as being the place where all humans need to get to and must get to. All they differ about is, the details. So on page 497, she gives an example. She's done this before with a different topic. She gives an example of someone called Montague, who is trying to answer back at the so-called racists who were saying, non-Europeans are backward. That's why they haven't developed to the extent that Europeans have developed. And this liberal person is like, no. See, what it is that, and he says this, quote, cultures differ from one another in the kind of development that they have realized. This does not mean that any culture is incapable of realizing or achieving the same degree of development as any other culture, but merely that most cultures have not had the same or similar opportunities to do so, and largely for that reason differ culturally from one another. And then Marimba Ani says, Montague's apology for quote-unquote primitive cultures assumes the European concept of progress. Cultural development depends not so much on opportunity as it does on worldview. And this is very important, on worldview. This is what the idea of progress precludes, the viability of other worldviews. But changes are not merely due to conditions. They occur in greater numbers where they are encouraged, even mandated by a culture that lives for them and by them. The possibility that European-style progress could be rejected does not occur to Montague any more than it does to MacLeod, another person. MacLeod's the racialist. To the European mind, there is no such possibility. Enlightened liberal and racialist alike both have unconsciously universalized the particular, i.e., the particular European concept of progress. They've made it out to be a universal concept. And next week, we're going to go into detail about this concept of universalism, which is the last chapter of the book. Both think that they are progressive. For both, progress is a given inexperienced, and assumed to be everywhere. The idea of progress is inherently racialist. Once it is accepted, the progressive person must always be identified as Euro-Caucasian. Jeez. So that's just a little thing for us to kind of remember that, you know, you can attack capitalism, you can attack these racists and so forth, but it's a very natural thing or a common thing to be like explaining, well, why hasn't Africa, like one of the things people say, something I've heard people say that Africans nowhere in Africa will you find a 2-story building pre-colonial, or something like, even I've even heard people say, oh, Africans didn't invent the wheel or some crap like that. And then people will be like, oh yeah, no. Well, the reason why we didn't, have multi-story buildings or whatever is because X, Y, Z. Why are there no great what's the word, archaeology in Africa? Oh, the reason we didn't have that is because it's like, don't buy into their assumptions about what progress is all about and where we're supposed to be headed. Don't even get into that. Just shut. My thing with them now is I just shut them right down. I say, listen, I'm not interested in your assumptions about what progress is all about. I'm not interested in your concept of progress, your concept of forward motion. I don't want to be part of that game. I don't want to be part of your forward motion. I'm not going to be. And it kind of goes back to the whole thing of like, oh, we were kings, like these white people like to mock us about. We were kings and queens and shit. We do that. We do that. We do fall into the trap of, oh, right, let's go and find all the great African kingdoms that we can find in history. Let's go and find the great monuments. Great Zimbabwe, yes, sub-Saharan great monument, big walls and so forth. You're just taking their assumptions and you're trying to justify them. And I get it at a young age. So I being a parent of young children has really shown me why that sort of thing would be important particularly when they're in school and they're learning about bloody the British Empire or the Greeks and the Romans and whatnot, and they'll be looking and saying, where's all my people in all of this? Then yes, it is important at that kind of level of analysis, 5-6-year-olds. It is important to, do you know what I mean? To demonstrate that actually, yeah, we did have all. We created the first ones. Actually, we were the first civilizers, if you want to call it that. We had our kingdoms and this, that, and the other. But let's not just try to do a sort of let's not try and do like a diversity and inclusion of history. We're not trying to include ourselves in their train. We're not trying to include ourselves in their progress train. Excuse me. And then I'll just end with, she talked about modernity. She talks about modernity. She talks about modernity and how this idea of modern is basically, we assume European is basically what modern is. And anyway, I won't go into that. That was quite interesting. One of the notes I made here is that this obsession with being up to date and state of the art and, all that sort of stuff, the newists, and all that kind of sector leading or industry standard. There's an obsession with being current and modern and here and now and contemporary. And it made me think, Paul, you might find this interesting. It made me think about music and how I've recently been getting a lot into jazz lately. What on earth was I thinking? I don't know what I was thinking of in my life up to now, all these decades I've been in existence, but I never really got into jazz music or what's termed as jazz. And now I'm getting into like this music. It's like, it's great. It's my latest one that I've learned learning about is Alice Coltrane, and just beautiful, soaring heavenly music. Anyway, reading around jazz, you see that there's all these conversations about, oh, this was this era of jazz and that era of jazz, but big band, bebop, hard bop, fusion, modern, spiritual, whatever. There's all these, they're constantly splitting up. And in all musics, they do this, this is what happens. We all do it with music as well. Like constantly, okay, what's the new sound? What's the next new sound? What's the next new genre? What's the next new, drill? Okay, drill's had its day. What's after drill now? I don't even know where we are. Is drill still contemporary? I don't know, like grime, hip hop, whatever, dance or trap, this, that, and the other. We are very much obsessed with splitting things up musically, definitely, but also in other ways, fashion, another splitting things up into eras, splitting it up into different epochs so that we can have a new epoch. Okay, this epoch's finished now. Let's have a new epoch. And it made me think about how, I can't imagine that in Africa in particular, amongst our people, I can't imagine that we ever did that with music or clothing. Because, for one thing, music wasn't objectified like that, as we spoke about in one of the chapters. And it wasn't separate from everyday life. It was just part of everything, and even clothes as well. Like sometimes in my head, sometimes when I was younger, when I used to see footage of Africa, people in Africa, and I'd look at them walking around in Kampala or Addis Ababa or wherever it might be, Soweto, and I'll look at the clothes they're wearing. I'll think, why are they all wearing these just dead clothes? Like, where's all the Nikes and the this and the that, and why are their hair even now to this day, I still sometimes think this. Like, you look at many, it's very rare for African people, men in particular, to have long hair. And there's a whole thing there. There's probably colonialism and whatnot. But here in the West, obviously, it's like we've got to be all individual. I've got to be individual. I've got my own style. I'm dressing like this. This is the subculture I'm part of, and this is the latest garms, latest clothes, and whatnot. I just don't think we'd have had that in our traditional African cultures, if you want to call it, pre-colonial African cultures. And that's just I suppose that's an example of how this progress thing even feeds into just the way that we even the food that we blooming eat, has to be new, the latest food, or what we eat now, tofu, whatever. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. Probably shouldn't have said that one. But I'm going to end with a quote here on page 509, which sums it all up very nicely. Sums the whole point up very nicely. It's a very, very short chapter. I can't believe I've managed to witter on for an hour and a half on this 20-page chapter. But page 509, last section, then we'll do a little bit of conversation. She says on page 509, really good summary. She summarizes the purpose of this progress ideology on page 508, 509. I won't read that again because I don't want to get too repetitive. But then she says this: in the final analysis, European progress brings economic profit and political and cultural power. Since this is obviously the case, the question becomes, why should Africans and other majority peoples embrace the European ideology of progress? Why should we do this? Europeans have been able to convince us that we are in a race. We enter the race somehow, not realizing that by its very definition, its locus of control, and the nature of its organization, we can never win. Meaning, if we're thinking that we're part of this universal march of human history, and we're progressing, we can't win that race because that's a European race. That race is set up by Europeans to dominate and control the whole cosmos, basically, progressively, always. We can't win that race. That's not us. That's not our race. We're part of what's supposed to be being dominated, actually. Where are we? We are losers even before we start, since the rules are defined by those who need our resources in order to win. We are afraid, this is powerful, we are afraid to remain distant, to refuse the terms defined by our enemies. We are afraid to organize our own race in which we set the goals. We never question the degree to which European progress carries with it the accoutrements of capitalist Christian Europeanism. We assume that the decadence of Europe, i.e., its crime-filled, drug-laden cities in which, because of spiritual retardation, disintegrated families, and the negative images produced by capitalist media, alienated children are forced into prostitution. So we assume that decadence is a natural byproduct of progress. Europeans colonized in America are told that progress for them means buying into the American system. And then a quote from Ronald Reagan: Black Americans must be part of the great technological revolution in order to advance, unquote. And Marimba Ani says, but our hope lies in those critical young Africans who have the intelligence and creativity to ask the African-centered question, advance toward what? And yes, that is a brilliant summation of the book, actually, really. Brilliant summation of where, definitely summation of where I'm my kind of head's at, and certainly with regard to this chapter and with this book, that it connects it connects with our political strategies, with our concepts of state, of nation, with our concepts of society. You can go back to Oyewonke Oyewumi, our concepts of sex and gender, our concepts of relationships, our concepts of all these different music and spirit and spirituality and all that sort of stuff. And certainly with regard to our concept of progress. If we're talking about progress, let's set the terms of progress, what progress means to us, and let's bang the drum for that progress. You know what I mean? Like, so, you know, that's kind of like, she's laying down the gauntlet there. There she was writing in 1994, I believe, 30 years ago, laying down the gauntlet to young Africans. I would have fallen into that category back then, not so much now. But that's the thing. That's what we need to do. We need to get ourselves out of the simulation. And yeah, you're right. You're right. Everything is politics. This simulation, that's actually a really good concept, thinking about it. Like a really important concept to sorry, let me put this comment here. So, you're, and I'll come back to the other comments, but which fits perfectly into my point. Everything is politics is saying regarding simulation. Our imaginations are colonized. We're currently in autopilot and need to wake up. Yeah, definitely. And everything for me, like, you know, everything must be open to consideration, i.e., all of our preconceptions about social life, culture, politics, economics, religion, physical health, mental health, all these things have to be questioned, just checked. All right, where are we? Are we sure that this is ours, or are we buying this off someone? Are we, you know, is this part of the colonization that we've kind of gone through? And it's great. And this is why this book has been so good, because, you know, it's kind of, in a way, it's a very simple book. It's basically that what she just said there is basically the purpose of the book, is to show us that much of what we consider to be basic truths about existence are anything but. They're propaganda that we've bought, and that propaganda was foisted on us, imposed on us in order to colonize us and to justify our enslavement of our ancestors and so on. So yeah, that's been my perception of this chapter so far. Another good chapter, a short chapter, but a good chapter, and lots in there, lots and lots in there. So there's a few comments that I'm going to go back to here. So we were talking about translation. Desaline said Google Translate. Yeah, so Google, but then, you know, Google Translate's a little bit, obviously, when I do translate languages that I am a bit familiar with, you can see where they get things slightly off, and then, but yeah, for French, Spanish, Portuguese, and stuff like that, yeah, Google Translate or other kinds of translating tools, even probably Open AI stuff, is very useful in that. So we've got less of an excuse in this regard with language than we would have had, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago when Marimba Ani was writing this book. Tito District, you said, and as you were saying, the rising rates of depression, mental health issues, and chronic diseases in these technologically advanced Western nations shows that they're not ideal models of development. Yeah, goes without saying, doesn't it? Goes without saying. Everything is politics. You said, unfortunately, a lot of people are emotionally age 5 or 6. Yeah, I mean, particularly if you're restricting yourself to social media. Social media, it's just, Twitter as well. I do love Twitter, but Twitter is also terrible because the beefs that you see, the ridiculous. There's a beef the other day about Cameroon versus Congo, apparently. And like, I'm just like, really? Anyway, so yeah, that's but yeah, sadly, it's kind of like what Kamjiverse was saying last week. Sadly, some of the things that we in the Anglophone world, Pan-African world, are kind of beefing about and arguing about and talking about, he argues, in the Francophone African world, they have way past that. They're a much more advanced level of Pan-African sentiment. So, that's something to just kind of bear in mind. Paul Morris, you said that the goal of European progress is to get Europeans to think and behave like them. Yeah. And to just keep us in a position where we're there to be constantly used by them as part of their progress, because it's like what is it? The death wish, the death urge thing, the death urge, constantly trying to avoid death, but they kind of also want, they're seeking after death all the time, but they're constantly trying to avoid death. And they detest us. They want us, they hate us. They want us destroyed. This is something I think about quite a lot, is about that whole thing about genocide. Like, they don't really want us. They don't want to genocide us. They just want to destroy us, but not wipe us out. I don't think they want to wipe us out. I just think they want us here, always there to be destroyed, perpetually destroyed and subjugated. I think that's, but it's a topic, definitely a topic I want to I want to talk about at some point. I think Afro-pessimism is a good one for that whole conversation. Paul Morris, you said again the preface of 2000 Seasons by Ayikwe Ama, and I think that's where we're talking about the more everything, more technology, less life, more more means of communication, less communication, more means of traveling, you see each other less. There's a guy called Ivan Illich who I came across when I was doing my development studies. I did a postgrad course in development studies, international development, and one of the guys I came across was a guy called Ivan Illich, who was like an implacable opponent of the so-called development narrative. And there's a whole thing called post-development, which I obviously found myself well drawn to. Anyway, he made the point that the invention of the car, this is supposed to be a tool of traveling, people bringing people together. But what really happened is that the car, motor vehicles, made it possible for people to go further and further away from one another. And that's basically what's happened, is that cars and planes and other modern modes of transportation have basically cut us off from one another, from our families and from our friends, even more than we were before. So yeah, all of these tools, all these technological tools and so forth are just making life much worse for everybody. And then my brother Neusi Rojo. Remember when that used to be your profile name, Neusi Rojo, or was it Rojo Neusi? Black soul or black spirit. Said, I surmise that a black think tank needs to begin the processes of working towards forming a framework that we can all abide by and use as a reference point to begin the architectural design of cultural parameters that guide us. Yeah. Baba Amos said it, didn't he? Again, 30 years ago or more, said that same point, is that we absolutely need that. And I'm disappointed in myself, but also disappointed in us a bit as people that we have what you might call think tanks. We do have them. So what's his name? What's the brother in Ghana? Cambon, brother Cambon, but he's got something like a think tank. Sorry, I'm really bad. I've not paid that much attention. They are out there. There's things that you might consider to be something like think tanks, but I don't know. Even within our social, our online circles, I just feel like we don't really talk about them much. Yeah, thank you, Abid. Thank you. Yeah, Obadele Cambon with the Abi Batumi. Yeah, I think that's probably one of my next stages of like of my own development with everything that I'm doing with this and just my understanding is to get much more acquainted with these think tanks, or maybe we can come up with a better term for them actually. Because think tanks is a bit, it's like what they culture cells or something. I don't know. We need many more of those. And yeah, Paul Morris, it's think tanks that we need. Tanks can't just have one. We need many because that's one of the things that Blueprint for Black Power is really good at. Written in the 90s, but just even at that time, he breaks it down. The Heritage Foundation, the New American, what was it? Project for a New American Century, American Enterprise Institute. What's the other? There's all these think tanks, and they're pouring billions of dollars every year into getting their ideas out there. In the UK, we have a lot of them as well. Taxpayers Alliance. Well, there's a bunch of them anyway, all based in a place called Tufton Street mainly. What are they called? Taxpayers Alliance, Centre for Policy Studies. All the right-wing think tanks are just pumping out material, getting their talking heads onto the TV news panels, going out there, setting the agenda, manipulating public opinion toward their direction. And it's actually comical almost for us to think that we can just have like books and videos and think that this is going to reach, or this is going to result in any kind of like mass scale paradigm shifts. Of course it's not, and I think that's the thing that in my understanding, I think we've probably flopped, is that these scholars of ours, and they were working. I said before, Marimba Ani, she came out of the 60s. She was in SNCC. She was in the southern. She was working with. She would have been working with the contemporary with the Panthers and all that kind of Black Panther Party and all those guys. She was doing the work, and then the likes of these guys then left us with these texts. We have the texts. I don't think much. There's stuff in there that there's probably not many. What am I saying? Sorry, slow down. There are probably not many new things that people are saying. It's already been written down for us in these books by Shekanta Diop and Oyewumi, Ife Amediumi, and various others. And people of different Amilcar Cabral, people of different languages and stuff. It's all there. What we've not been able to do for various reasons is to do what you're saying, Black Soul, with regard to codifying. Forming a framework and translating these ideas into something that can. I suppose one of the things you're probably looking at is so we can start to recognize what Pan-African life looks like. Sorry, a bit distracted there, but I'm going to come back to that post-development comment in a sec. To operationalize it, yeah. And then everything's politics. You said, great point with regard to Black Soul. We need a collective social code of conduct of sorts, but how to get people to subscribe and uphold it is a challenge. Yeah, tell me about it. You know what? I speak quite a lot with my wife, mwanamke wangu, my woman. Anyway, we speak, and we talk a lot about things that are going on with our friends and families and so on. And often we'll bring up the case of people like, oh, this person's in this situation, it's really hard for them. Often around relationships is a thing that can happen, but other things as well, like family situations, and so on and so forth, financial situations even. And the thing that we're adults now, do you know what I mean? We're big adults. We're not 15 anymore. And the thing I just keep coming back to, one of the main questions I'm like, well, okay, who do they have around them? Who are their friends? Who are their, if it's a relationship thing, who is that relationship Who's around them to hold that relationship to account? Who's around them to hold the individuals, the partners to account? Who, before they got into this relationship, who was involved? Were there some elders? Were there some close relatives? Were there some trusted relatives who could be relied upon to speak truth into these situations and to influence these people? Are there people that we have around us who, you know, we're accountable to, I suppose, is the point. And what's my point I'm making? Those are the kinds of things that this question here with regard to a collective social code of conduct of some sort and how to uphold it. That's what we need somehow. Somehow we need to get to a situation where we have those sorts of networks amongst us, those sorts of structures amongst us. It's like this way the rubber hits the road, isn't it? You've got the Yurugu and Blueprint for Black Power, or invention of women. Yay, great, good, necessary, but it needs to have a real life application. The ideas are very important, but it needs to be real life. We need to have real life application, so that, and where we will know that we are, doing well for ourselves, where we know we are, transforming, is when more of us do have people in our lives who, we'll hold each other to account to, or whatever, if that makes sense. So, but it's a really, really, really important kind of area that kind of, and I'm going to talk about in a minute. I'm going to talk about the book I think I would like us to read next. Which kind of gets into that a little bit, but yeah. Yeah, Black Soul, you said, if you don't like the term think tanks, let's call it ideological incubators. Yeah, that's good. Incubators. That's good. That is good. Well, I must give a shout out to the AAPRP, All African People's Revolutionary Party. I used to be in that party, and I think they have the seeds of what we need in their structures and in their ways of, operating. At least on paper, they do. Because they have the work study structure where you're supposed to meet up frequently and read a book, but then you're not just discussing books like we're doing. You're also talking about the practice that you've done, the work that you've been doing, and so forth. And that's what we need. We need something like that these think tanks can be putting out there. Everything is politics. Yeah, all these think tanks, these European Chatham House, the RSA. Yeah, they're just all there left and right. They've all got them. Fabian Society. So then everything was politics. She said the illusion of inclusion got our people in the chokehold. Back in Dr. Amos's and Dr. Amos et al. Period, there wasn't too much diversity and inclusion propaganda. Yeah, and I keep saying that diversity and inclusion has been a fantastic tool of blunting the militancy of Black nationalists, because it's just money in it. They dangled money in front of us. Look, we've got diversity and inclusion jobs. And look, you can be a member of parliament. Look, you can be a CEO of the Fortune 500 or the FTSE 100. Yeah, and too many of us got sidetracked by that. It was almost better when there was just a lot more hostility, almost, because it forced us to work together. Because it was an imperative for us to work together. But that's just been the problem, isn't it? Black Soul, Neil Sirojo. Said, this is what we need, the best minds to rub shoulders and come up with ways to implement those ideas and implement a reward punishment dynamic. Yeah, and I must say, Obadele Kambon, who incidentally his late father, Kobe Kambon, is constantly being referred to in Yurugu in glowing terms. And that's one thing I quite like, is that as I'm doing more of this kind of reading, I'm seeing these dots, these connections between all of these people, So Marimba Ani at the beginning, she lavishes praise on Baba John Henrik Clark and Baba, what's his name, Molefe Kete Asante. You know, I just saw a tweet today about how Molefe Kete Asante has wrote a book about Sheikh Anta Diop, and Sheikh Anta Diop, of course, is referenced heavily in this book, and so on and so forth. Yeah, what was my point? I can't remember what my point was with that, but why did I say that anyway? Just sometimes I say stuff in these videos, and at the time I don't know why I said it, and then afterwards I watch it back and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That does follow to what you were just saying. But in the heat of the moment, I sort of can forget it. And then Black Soul, you continued and you said, and then we can reinforce the framework and close up, conjure up any potential loopholes that can be exploited. Yeah, and I think an important thing with all of this as well, a very, very important thing with all of this is that we can't be doing all of this sort of stuff in public. I feel like people like me, there's a certain element of kind of retreating into the safety of, oh, okay, I can just sit down here, rock up, put my thing on, and we can talk. And this is necessary and useful and very, very, very important. But you cannot be strategizing to defeat your enemy on YouTube. It's just a stupid idea. Do you know what I mean? We could talk in general terms here on with regard to things that we could be doing, but we need to be getting into the thing of more secrecy, especially when you're talking about. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of the sort of vanguard-y type approach where it's like, okay, here's a small select group of people who will strategize for the masses and then lead the masses. I'm not a fan of that, but there is a somewhat of a sort of element of something in there that particularly when we are, because remember, we as Pan-Africanists and Black nationalists are very, very, even a small proportion of the wider Black population. I think varies from place to place, country to country, culture to culture, but generally speaking, at least in my understanding here in the UK and US, which is where I know, we're a small minority, so we are sort of like almost a bit of a vanguard-ish kind of. But anyway, the point is that this sort of stuff has got to be, can't be all that out in open, like, yeah, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, because who does that? Do you know what I mean? Who does that? We need the secrecy, and we need that element of, and I think actually part of that is we need more interpersonal, actual physical interpersonal conversing and so on, because I think that's where, by doing so much stuff online only, is that you are losing, I don't know, even like on a metaphysical level, I think we're losing somewhat of a vibration. Do you know what I mean? There's a certain vibration that you get when you're with someone in a physical thing. Even like, I don't know, we communicate more in our bodies and than what you can just tell from from just looking at someone online or whatever. So yeah, that's just another element there to kind of, and it obviously it sounds weird because it's like, well, no, we want all the masses to get involved, and yes, obviously we do, but there's stages to this game. Do you know what I mean? There's levels to this, and there's stages, and we just got to understand where we are at now is not a place for, let's just be completely open about every single thing that we're doing. Not until, the only time you can start to be like that is when you can physically defend yourself from attack, infiltration, and all that sort of stuff. And for us here, let me put it this way: for us here in the UK and most of the diaspora, we probably can't. Probably that's where the continent, it becomes more important, is because there, I experienced this a little bit myself when I was in Ghana, that there's much more of a space there for Pan-Africanist organizing and so forth, because there's more. Ghana's probably a little bit of an anomaly in that regards because of its particular history, but there's more space for it in the continent. And the fact is, in theory, our people are running the thing in theory. If they can just not be so, there's space. Obviously, they're at the behest of the IMF and World Bank and whatever it might be, US aid, and DFID and all that sort of stuff. But there's space. There's space, more space there in the continent. So yeah, Black Soul, yeah, you said you agree. We can have public rhetoric and ideas that are generalized for public consumption, but behind closed doors, we exchange more intimate details for our ideological. You're a brother of words, man. For our ideological private sector. Yeah, that's good. I like that. Absolutely. Yep. And then everything's politics. You said can be so lonely, constantly moving between the worlds, conscious and unconscious. Yeah, it is. Bloody hell, it really is. And I'm fairly blunt with. I can be a bit of a blunt person, and I think sometimes I probably put people, I probably offend people when I'm like, someone's telling me some situation, I'm like, yeah, but I don't know. They're complaining about work or something. I was like, yeah, but that work is basically a waste. It's just all waste. It's just you're just on this what's the word? Hamster wheel. You're just on a hamster wheel. It's all pointless anyway. Don't get too emotional about it. It's like, okay, thanks, Ellie. That's helpful. Thank you. But yeah. There you go. And then everything with politics, you said 100% with regard to vibration. Yeah, absolutely. Now, next week we are going to do chapter 10 of Yurugu. Hopefully I'll be able to read all of it, because I must say at the moment I'm struggling to get all of the reading in each week. It's like I'm having to pull out all the stops, find every little nook and cranny, every little of time to be able to read it. This one's page 511 to 552. Gosh, that's 41 pages. So let me see if I could do that. It's like, it shouldn't be that hard. Not 10 pages a day roughly, but trying to get 10 pages a day while also being a young dad, the dad of young children, is can be hard work. And then what I wanted to do, I think the next book we're going to cover is going to be. Can you read that? This one. Gosh, it's very glossy. Anyway, it's called Kindezi. There you go. Yeah, Kindezi, The Congo Art of Babysitting by Keikia Bunseki Fukiao and A.M. Lukondo Wamba. And you'll see there, talking about the connections, with an introduction by Marimba Ani. Now, this is a very, very, it's like 40 pages. It's about the same length as this chapter in Yurugu that we're going to read. I read I got it a few months ago, and I read the introduction. They're the authors, by the way. Look at those fabulous 80s photos, yeah. But yeah, Fukiao is now an ancestor. I've not heard about Lukondo Wamba, but they're Congolese. They're both Congolese. They're by Congo. And I read the introduction from Marimba Ani the other day, and oh my goodness me, she speaks in absolutely glowing terms about this book. Yeah, she her in her introduction, she's basically she says initially she was a little bit skeptical about the book, wondering well, what babysitting, but she basically says this book is absolutely. And I think the reason why I want to read this book, and I think we'll read a book about relationships as well at some point, is because I do think it is a little bit about that rubber hits the road stuff now. I think I would like, we've talked about the big ideas and the concept and the ideology and stuff like that, which has been good. I would like though now to also be a little bit more focused or applied, I suppose, with some of our readings to start to think about how some of these ideas that we've been reading about, when we do the theory stuff, how some of that kind of applies itself in practice. And obviously, as a parent, parenting is this is basically all about parenting, but it's not just for parents. My understanding of this Kindezi thing is basically like that, the raising of children, infants, is done, but was done in our traditional settings, was done by other children, older children, and by elders. And the whole, like, let me read. Marimba Ani says one thing, which is just beautiful. She says that, where is it? She says something which was something on the lines of the entrance of the new life, the entrance of this new life into the world is entrusted to the elders, the ones who are soon to become ancestors. And in that sense, it's that cycle. It's that cycle of connection where, you know, the new ones are coming into this world, and they're going to be schooled and brought into an understanding of what it means to be an umtu, a person, by those who are, by virtue of their advanced years, they are the most full persons, the most full watu, if you want to say it. They're the most human humans because they've been around the longest and they've got the most wisdom in theory, you know. And then the children as well, the youngsters get involved in it as well because it's, you know, linking all the generations together. So I think that's going to be the book that we read next, Kindezi. So yeah, as I say, it's only 40 pages, so it's going to be very quick. So I'm going to have to think about the other book that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about after that. I'm looking at Sobonfu Some, the spirit of intimacy, or potentially the Bakongo, what was it? The Bakongo cosmology, again by Baba Fukiao. So that's just to give you a heads up on that. And we've probably got, so we've got next week for chapter 10 of Yurugu. So, the week after that will be the conclusion of Yurugu, where she brings it all together. So we've got 2 more weeks after today for Yurugu, and then we'll do Kindezi and something like the 2nd week of June, and then after I'll announce at some point soon about what a good, you know, what book we'll move on to next week. I'm probably going to try and do shorter books than Yurugu, just to, you know, break it up a little bit and give me a little bit of a respite. You know, this reading schedule can be quite taxing at times. And then Everything Was Politics, you said that Credo Mutwa, what do they call him? Baba Credo Mutwa. They always call him, there's some word that they say. But yeah, anyway, Credo Mutwa also talked about elders taking care of children and the spiritual practicalities. Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's, you know, breaks my heart, the fact that often elders can have nothing to do with the youngsters that are coming up, or we have a severe lack of elders who you would actually want to be raising up your children, helping to raise up your children. But anyway, all right, guys, that has been Yurugu chapter 9. Absolute, really enjoyable conversation today. It's been. Asante sana, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for all of your input, all of your comments. Or sangoma, yes. And there's another word, not sangoma. There's another term that they call credo mutua. I'll find out and I'll put it in chat. Oh, also, Tito District, you asked about that guy's name. So the post development, Ivan Illich is one. What's the other guy's name? There's about 2 or 3 of them. It's been a while since I've read them. I can't remember. I'll let you know anyway. I'll message you and let you know those guys' names. But yeah, thank you. Nakushukuru namshukuru sana. I want to habari. No, what's the word? Njoni njema, asubuhi njema, mchana mwema. Whatever the time is in the part of the world that you're in, I wish you a blessed time. Mungu akubariki. May the ancestors bless you as well. And see you next time, next Saturday, same time, same place. All right. Salama kwaherini.